And I don't input the tests until they're all graded. I will have them graded for you by next class. And you can check online for your grade by... what happened? Stop. Push the button. You check online for your grade soon. Anyone not here last class? Everyone else has taken the test? No one needs to take the test now? Okay. I know it's soon, but the study guide for test 2 is posted. It's the easiest way to prepare is to start looking at that study guide. Look at the questions. You had questions on Baron de Holbach for today. Next week, next class, Monday, you have questions on W.T. Stace. Look at those questions first. Download the study guide. Print it out. Laminate it like you did your syllabi. And then you'll have it with you all the time. You can pull it out and see, I have an answer to that question. When you're reading it, it will focus your reading. It will help not only with the essay question, but it'll help with the multiple choice questions too. Okay? So start looking at the study guide. Now, new section. So let's do something a little bit different. If you would, everyone would just stand at your desks. You don't have to move beyond your desk. Just stand in place by your desk. If you're taking the test, you're fine. You're fine. Don't let that bother you. Okay. I'm guessing that's everyone. I can't tell. This is awkward. All right. Thank you. Well done.
Is that it?
Yeah. That's it. There you are. I haven't made enough to say. All right. What did I just demonstrate?
Free will?
And what about it?
That it's non-existent.
That you don't have it. You don't have it. Unless somebody wants to say, you were thinking to yourself, you know what? I really want to stand. I desire to stand. And then I ask you, and you're like, wow, it's amazing. I wanted to do that. Now I choose to stand. And I chose freely. How many chose freely to stand? How many really wanted to stand in that moment? You did? Do you still want to stand? Why aren't you? Go ahead, man. So that's fine. It doesn't disturb. If it's an hour and 20-minute class, if you're starting to fall asleep and it wakes you up to stand up, do so. Not in front. In the back, you could do so. Move to the side. Wakes you up. That's fine. People are just coming in. Everyone's taking the test, right? You guys were here last week? Last class, you took the test? Okay. Should we do the thing again? So you guys missed out. See what happens if you come in late. You miss out on some cool exercises. I can't put it into words, the exercise we did, but it was awesome. I'm sorry, I can't. You'll have to ask somebody else. They won't be able to explain it to you, though. So, I'll ask a different question. How about this? Why are you in class? I mean, it's kind of nice out, and there's a beach right there. Why aren't you at the beach? How many would rather be at the beach right now than in class? Be honest. It's not going to... Let me rephrase that. How many would rather not be in class right now? That was a lot. And very quickly, without much hesitation. Yeah, I don't want to be here. Which is fine. So what are you doing here? Are you here against your will? Do you not have free will? Or can you describe your being here in terms of you having freely chosen to be here? You understand the question? What does free will even mean? What is your sense of that phrase? When you hear free will, do humans have free will or not? What comes to mind? Yeah.
An illusion that makes people comfortable.
Oh, that's something. What is free will? It is an illusion. What does it mean to be an illusion? We think it's there, and it feels comfortable. It would be really uncomfortable if we felt nothing I do seems to be of my own choice. That would be really awkward. That would be uncomfortable. But it feels good to presume you're in control. In most cases, if my car gets out of control and I can't control it and I hit a family of 4, I want to be able to say, I wasn't in control. And And that's no illusion there. I truly wasn't in control. But that's a specific case. Quick reminder, anyone who was not here last class, I've gotten everyone who's taken the test. Yes, those who just came in, everyone's taken the test last Wednesday, right? Just going to make sure. Okay, so when I asked you to stand, you chose to stand. You can even say that. I chose to stand. Does that mean you're free because you chose to stand? Is that enough? What would you have to ask next?
You would have to ask permission to leave.
Oh, I'm sorry, just about the notion of whether or not your choice to stand counts as freedom. Is it enough to say, I'm free because I chose to stand, and that's why I stood? Do you know what did you want to add to it?
Don't you have to want to?
Yes, and you have to...
What do you mean by free?
It's not determined. That's one element of it, although that's a loaded question too. It requires some investigation. What do you mean by free? What we're dealing with now is not, we've left epistemology, we're now into metaphysics. And it's a metaphysical question whether or not humans have free will. There's political freedom. That's not what we're interested in here. I can move my arms like this, whatever. I can be imprisoned and not be able to move my arms. That doesn't mean I lack free will to control, let's say, the thoughts that I have in my head. That's where we're getting at with respect to the metaphysical question. And I'll define what metaphysics is in more detail in a moment. Yeah?
Why did I choose to stand?
I'm sorry?
Why did I choose to stand? Good question.
Oh, right. That's really... So, do you have an answer to why you chose?
No, I mean, that's...
Oh, I thought you were going to answer it. So yes, that is the question. Why did you choose to stand? So, exactly. It's not a free act just because you chose it. The determinists, like who? Who's the reading you had for today? Oh, no. Baron something or other. Good enough. Baron de Holbach. That's good. He's a determinist. He's going to ask you, yeah, you chose to stand, but where did the choice come from? And even if you say, I desired to stand, he's going to ask the question, where did that desire come from? Do you see? Now, this is an issue. This is the metaphysical question of free will. Where's my clicker in case I want to walk? And there's a joke. It's based on that movie. It's based on that porno. I'm sorry. But do you get it? I'm sorry. That was inappropriate, what I just said. But you know what? I couldn't help myself. How about that? What do you say to that? Your Honor, I wasn't free. Or, tenure committee, I wasn't free. I had to tell the joke. It would have been irresponsible of me not to tell that joke. I was determined to tell that joke. Do you buy that? Would that work? Would that ever work in court? You committed a crime. Didn't a kid in Texas, 17-year-old, stole a car, got drunk, killed 2 people? You remember that? And he got off, to an extent, because his lawyers, I don't remember if the lawyers came up with this term, or if the media talking about it came up with the term. But the argument was basically, look, this kid doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong. He didn't freely do what he did because his parents didn't teach him. He suffered from affluenza, which sounds like a disease, as if he couldn't control his actions. But what's the word affluent mean? He's very wealthy. His parents were too wealthy. They were too distant from him. They didn't teach him right from wrong. Therefore, he wasn't responsible for what he did. And that argument was effective to an extent, in ways that it's interesting. The other direction never is. My client is guilty of this crime, fine. But he only had one parent, and she had 3 jobs, and she couldn't afford to take care of him, and therefore she didn't have time to teach him right from wrong. That argument somehow doesn't ever work, but this one did, which I found fascinating. It worked up to a point. But that seems to, we don't like that idea that somebody can get away with a crime and claim that they weren't free. They didn't do it freely. They were controlled in some way. What's that?
Defense of insanity.
The insanity plea, which is very difficult. So I see when I see people looking at computers and laughing, I'm assuming you're looking up Free Willy porn. What is it? Oh, I said, okay. I stepped on you, I said.
Oh, it's okay.
Rarely are notes funny, that's why I was confused, but good, all right. So thank you for showing me that. So think about, insanity plea. Think about the case back in 1969. His name escapes me now, but he got a high-powered rifle and started shooting from the clock tower. And he was laughing as he did so. Apparently, prior to this, he had talked to his psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever, saying he's having thoughts, he's not being able to control his impulses. After an autopsy, it was determined that he had tumors in his brain in certain areas that deal with a number of issues that have to do with impulse control, among other things. It's a lot more complex than what I'm presenting here. The point is, it seems those are mitigating factors. It doesn't seem obvious that he's completely 100% responsible. It seems, in fact, that if the tumor wasn't there, perhaps he wouldn't have engaged in that activity. And there are other cases. You can think of cases in which psychiatrists have patients come to them complaining that they're having these thoughts that they didn't want to have. They don't want the thoughts, but they're having them anyway. They don't know where they're coming from. Thoughts about pedophilia. I don't like these thoughts, I don't want them, and yet they keep coming into my head. What's going on? They do all sorts of tests, PET scans, CAT scans, and so forth, and they find, again, some kind of growth or tumor around a certain part of the brain having to do with impulse control, among other things. They remove that, and the patient's desires with respect to that go away. Then they come back in some cases, go back into the doctor, and they find out, they determine, we just didn't take it all out. They get the rest of it out, and they're fine. In those cases, doesn't it seem our sense of freedom is limited, and in an obvious way? And you might respond, well, those are extreme cases. Where's the... let's go skip that for a moment. Look at the case of Phineas Gage, which you may know this character from this person, from your psychology classes maybe, or history classes. Phineas Gage was working on a railway. He was doing some kind of construction. He was tamping down some dynamite, and it accidentally went off and shot the rod through his head, as you can see where it went, and landed some 250 yards away. He lived for like 3 years or so after this incident. Here he is afterwards, holding the rod that got shot through his head. He's not quite smiling. It's unclear what he's doing there. But according to his friends and family, he became a different person. He was angry all the time, which I guess, give him some credit, he has 2 extra holes in his head now. He's going to have a different attitude toward life, perhaps. But this question of free will comes into play here. And notice the question of free will overlaps with other questions that we're going to address in the coming weeks, namely personal identity, which we come to after this discussion. And then mind and body. How does the mind interact with the body? It's hard to talk about any one of these without jumbling them together a little bit. So just to give you a heads up, each of these metaphysical questions, which I'll define in a moment, are interrelated. He, in a sense, becomes a different person in a way that was uncontrollable for him. How could he control it? Parts of his brain that were normally reserved for, let's say, impulse control and social behavior control and so forth were gone. So it's not surprising. Those are cases in which somebody lacks free will. And they're perhaps unproblematic. But what about you? What about a normal case, let's say? Surely you have freedom. Surely the things that you do, you choose to do, and you choose them because it's based on an authentic desire to have done what you did. And importantly, you could have done otherwise than you did. You are free in that sense, surely. These anomalous cases are just that. They're anomalies. They're outliers. Correct? I'm going to push the determinist line today. Partly because I think most people coming into philosophy for the first time, in general, presuppose or are sympathetic to a free will stance. Either a kind of compatibilism, which we'll define, or even a more robust, stronger form of free will known as libertarianism. Not the political notion of libertarianism, though it has the same term, liberty, but the metaphysical notion. So for the purposes of today, I'm going to be defending or expanding on Baron de Holbach's reading in support of what's known as determinism. Sometimes it's referred to as hard determinism. And next class, next week, we'll look at counters to this. So how can we show that the normal brain, the normal person who doesn't have anomalies with respect to damage, with respect to tumors and so forth, how can we show that we're free in that in everyday situations? That's what the standing in class was supposed to demonstrate. But we can give other examples. And I'll just give you one anecdote, and you see if this relates to situations that you've experienced. When I was 10 or 11, I don't know exactly, I was sitting with a friend of mine in the front of church. We had to go to Mass, and it was a hugely important Mass. Very important, which is important to the story. In such a case, you probably shouldn't have your kids sit with friends, but that's what happened. And the priest comes out in this very somber and important occasion, and he comes walking out looking exactly like a leprechaun. And my friend and I note this. This dude's a leprechaun. And we started laughing. And we could not stop laughing. And then he started speaking. Can you guess what he sounded like? Fucking leprechaun. He sounded just like a leprechaun. And I don't know if I said that. We didn't talk that way back then. And we couldn't stop laughing. The more we tried to stop, the harder it became. We had no control over ourselves. And you might say, well, that too. That's just a strange situation. You weren't free in that particular case. Fine. But you are in other cases. Right? And you were like 10 or 11. 10 or 11-year-olds aren't as free. Notice how we might say that. We're not as free as adults are. Right? Are adults freer than children? What does that mean?
I don't know. I feel like in some instances children are more free.
How are they more free?
Like in their mind, they don't have as many like mental limitations.
Yeah, they're free to do also. Yeah, they don't have to do work, so they're not free in that sense. And their imaginations are less constrained.
Yeah.
Right? They can play for hours doing the same damn thing. How can you still be interested in this? I don't want to do it anymore. I'm sorry, that came out. Yes?
I think hypothetically, we're all like free except from death. Like that's the only thing that we're not free from.
And taxes.
No, like
coming up.
hypothetically, we're completely free,
Mhm.
but then society is like
Oh.
very controlling, if that makes sense. So like, the only reason we're not free now is because we know there are repercussions, and to me, like the people that are the most free are now in prison
Interesting.
because they did what they wanted.
Presumably.
Yeah.
That's a complex issue. But yeah, why are they most free? You'd have to ask them to see if they agree with you with that. Because that would be interesting. You know what? I think what they would say is, well, let's trade places. But I see what you mean. That's a difference between political freedom and metaphysical freedom. Very good. So I might be chained or confined in a prison. That's different than saying, I'm not free to go where I want. But they can't control my thoughts. I can control my thoughts, which might be considered one of the most fundamental elements of freedom. I have freedom of the will. Not only can I control my thoughts, but if my actions are dependent upon my thoughts, well, then my actions are free to the extent that my thinking is free. Which, of course, it is. That's to goad you, of course. It's not so obvious that your thoughts are free. Do you control your thoughts? They're my thoughts. Of course, they're in my head. Nobody else is controlling them. Yes?
Don't think about purple elephants.
Say again?
Don't think about purple elephants.
I'm not. I'm thinking of a yellow giraffe.
Well, you already thought I just controlled your thoughts.
Damn it. Did you? I was going to have you think of an elephant. No. I was going to have you think of an animal. You can do that now.
Now I'm thinking of an elephant though.
You're thinking of an elephant now?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he messed it up. You ruined it. You're forcing it. Can anyone think of anything else than an elephant? Try.
Tiger.
A tiger. How'd you do it? How did you do that?
Orange.
What's that?
Orange stripes.
That's how you did it? This is a very remedial class. How did you put together a tiger? With orange and stripes. Yes, but notice the question. It's a deceptively simple, a deceptively difficult question. How did you think of the animal that you thought of? So we're thinking of elephants, and now we think of purposely think of something else. Another animal came to mind. How did it come to your mind? Did you choose it in the sense that you have like a Rolodex of animals or images? Like there's a giraffe. Nope, don't want him. There's a narwhal. Well, if there's a narwhal, you're picking the narwhal. Let's be honest. Or is it a matter of I ask you a question, you're conscious of the question, and then there's all sorts of non-conscious stuff going on in your brain, and then giraffe, tiger, whatever, pops into your head. The neuroscientist Sam Harris has an example related to this, to demonstrate from his perspective that even our thoughts are not actually our own. As William James, the psychologist, puts it, sometimes it appears the thoughts are the thinkers themselves. And to give you a sense of this, next time you wake up, have a pad of paper and a pen, and the second you wake up, immediately write down the thoughts that you were just having. And ask yourself, who was having those thoughts and where those thoughts came from? Because sometimes they're really weird. Usually you'll just forget them, right, if you wake up and go on with your day. But if you're consciously and remind yourself, write down the thoughts you immediately have upon waking, it's going to potentially be weird. And you'll think to yourself, I don't know that those are my thoughts. Yeah.
Why did you just think of the moment that you told us to do that though? Because you wake up and you're like, oh, I have to write down my thoughts because of what happened.
Right, but I'm asking what are the thoughts that are immediately going through your head as you woke up? And so hopefully you'll remember to do that because of what we discussed. But oftentimes what happens when you first wake up, your brain is doing all sorts of weird stuff. In fact, most of what your brain is doing is below the level of consciousness, which is extremely relevant and important to questions of freedom. Because if most of what I do is not conscious, and if, this is a big if consciousness, conscious awareness, is necessary for me to have done something freely, then it seems most of what I do, I don't do freely, because most of what I do is below the level of consciousness. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but I saw a hand in the middle. Did you have a question?
I was just thinking, like, when you were talking about the idea, like, when you first wake up, and, like, jot down the first idea, like, what's the difference between, like, dreaming, when you, like, wake up, and, like, I had this dream, but, like, I don't remember, like, thinking about
It is,
having that dream.
exactly. So it's related to that too. And dreams are types of thought, types of mental states. And maybe some people have control over their dreams. They have lucid dreaming states. But that's rare, I think. Oftentimes the thoughts seem to happen to us. And it's an interesting question. How much control do you have over the thoughts? It's certainly not the case that I'm thinking about what I'm going to say, word for word, and then saying it, because then I would be thinking it twice. And I may have used this example before. We're so used to talking that it doesn't seem possible that we're able to consciously determine the thoughts that we're about to say. We just say them. I'm talking really, really fast right now. There's no way I'm consciously aware of what I'm going to say in the future. I'm just now thinking, and I'm saying it at the same time. Am I consciously choosing the words and then saying them? That would require a whole lot of mental activity, it seems, that would render us paralyzed. We don't think that way or that fast. So there's some problems with respect to the role that consciousness plays, and I want to return to that question in a bit, because, again, if I'm not fully conscious of what I'm doing, how could I be held responsible? I'm not free, right? Think of the case of somebody walking into a burning building and saving the family, and then getting a medal. Well done, you saved the family. You're a hero. And then the person wakes up. What happened? You just saved that family. Really? I was asleep. I don't remember anything. Well, then you don't really deserve praise, do you? Just as you wouldn't deserve punishment if you did a crime while sleepwalking, if it could be demonstrated that you were sleepwalking. And some people have conditions in which they do things in their sleep. I'll get your question one second. To expand on this, you can think of a case in which a person has, in normal dream state, normal deep sleep state, there's paralysis of your body such that you don't act on the dreams that you're having. So you don't get up out of your bed and run away from the dragon or whatever it is you're dreaming about. In some cases, that paralysis doesn't happen. And people will act out their dreams and harm the people next to them and potentially even kill them, which is awful. But we wouldn't, it seems, intuitively, we wouldn't say that person's guilty of a crime. Why? Because they weren't conscious of what they were doing at the time. And in those rare cases, it seems obvious, or at least more obvious, that we ought not punish them because they didn't intend to do it and they weren't free to have done otherwise because they weren't conscious. Which seems to show consciousness is at least necessary, perhaps, for there to be freedom of choice. And if that's true, we have to demonstrate to some extent that we're conscious enough in all the actions that we take to justify them being free. Go ahead.
But I'm a little confused, like, obviously, like, I would side with the person who is unconscious because I'd be like, well, they didn't mean to.
Right.
But also I feel like, why can we separate kind of two parts of our brain? Because our subconscious and the part of us that's not really conscious is still us. Like, it's still
very
our
good.
me.
That's
So
excellent.
technically, me is controlling it, kind of.
But why do we have to say technically? That sounds like a mitigating. That's very good, though. Remember that response for April 25th. Can you remember that? Around this time. So, April 25th and the 30th, because when we get into implicit bias, we'll talk about whether or not one can be held responsible for actions that are biased against certain groups of people, even though the person's unaware that they're doing it. And your response with respect to it's still my brain, it's still me, even though I'm not conscious of it, will be a very interesting potential response. And we might say the same thing about this with free will, which brings up the next question. If much of our daily activity is driven by non-conscious thinking, and the non-conscious thinking is driven by, and here's the hypothesis from determinists, driven by causal factors outside of our control, then how in the world can we be said to be free? In the metaphysical sense, let me give you a definition now of metaphysics. It's a bit late in the game. Oh, by the way, there was one other story about the sleepwalking. There was a woman who was gaining weight. She had no idea why. In a separate situation, she learned that she sleepwalks, and then she put the two together. Maybe I'm eating while I sleep. And she put a camera in her kitchen, and indeed, she watched the video the next day, sleepily walking into the kitchen, taking out the bacon, uncooked, mind you, and just chowing down. I don't know if uncooked bacon is any less healthy than cooked bacon, probably equally. No, it's got to be worse. But there's the evidence. Is she responsible? You're responsible for your weight gain. I don't think that's necessarily true in that case, because of the lack of consciousness there. Okay, so metaphysics. What is metaphysics? It's a fundamental branch of philosophy that is to be distinguished from what you see at some bookstores. You'll see a section called metaphysics. Be cautious. That's not the philosophical sense. It's usually going to have things like New Age, which is fine, New Age cultish kind of things, which is not terribly fine, self-help type stuff, guru type stuff, not the sense that we use in philosophy. Literally, metaphysics from the Greek metaphysica just means after the physics. But as a dual meaning, Aristotle, famous philosopher, student of Plato's, collected his lectures on physics. He gave a lot of lectures on physics, what you would consider to take in a physics class today. They bound that up, and those lecture notes became his text, the physics. After his death, his students followed up his physics with the metaphysics, all his notes that came after the physics. So it has that literal sense. But it also implies something more. Metaphysics is beyond physics. If you want, it's actually more fundamental. Aristotle famously said of metaphysics that it is the first philosophy. While physicists presuppose certain things about nature, namely that it's physical, they presuppose certain things, neuroscientists presuppose certain things about brains. And they'll speak of minds and brains oftentimes in connected ways. The metaphysician does not presuppose these things. The metaphysician asks questions like, what is the ultimate nature of reality? The physicist has already presupposed it. It's physical stuff. It's atoms, it's quarks, it's gluons, muons, or strings, or something like that. The metaphysician does not assume that. The metaphysician does not assume that all there are neurons and brains. The metaphysician asks, the metaphysical question is, if all there is physical stuff, how does something like consciousness arise? What is consciousness? Which we'll spend a lot of time on that in the coming weeks. What is a self? Do selves exist independently of physical stuff? Do minds exist independently of physical stuff? If so, how do they interact? Those are metaphysical questions. Are selves, are persons free? Do we have free will? That is a metaphysical question. Does God exist? That's a metaphysical question. Prior to doing physics, Aristotle thought, we have to engage in metaphysical studies. We don't presuppose. We ask, what is the fundamental nature of reality? Go ahead.
Is there any branch of philosophy that argues that consciousness actually impedes someone's free will? I was thinking about it, like when people drink, they usually do it to kind of get rid of what their conscious brain tells them to do, because it makes them feel like they can act on their desires more easily.
Then why would consciousness remove freedom? I don't know why. I just noticed this. I made this lecture way in the future. I don't know why I just noticed that. It's an error. Does consciousness reduce freedom, whereas animals are more free because they're less conscious?
Just consider like the concept of ego and id, which are like psychological concept where it's like there's a balance between your conscious and unconscious self.
Mm-hmm.
The id is like the unconscious self, the ego is the superconscious self.
And we're constraining ourselves. The more hyper-conscious we are, that's actually limiting what we can do. There is a sense in which that argument could be made. It's consciousness that actually causes us to lack free will. But that would be, if we take it to its logical extremes, that means that this chair, this table, would be more free than me. Why? Because it lacks consciousness. It's totally free to just be. But we wouldn't say of the table, if it fell down and hurt my toe, I wouldn't say, damn you, actually I do sometimes. I'll kick it, which is stupid. What am I doing? I'm anthropomorphizing. But we don't, if asked, you don't really think that table has agency. You don't think that table intended to harm you. Of course not. That would be absurd. Unless you're the Roman, or the, was he Greek? Xerxes? No, he was Persian. Any historians here? The general Xerxes, great name, spelled with an X. Xerxes. He was, according to the historian Herodotus, he tried to get his troops to pass a body of water, but he couldn't because the water level kept rising, and he got angry at the water, so he had his troops punish it. Whip it and put chains in it or whatever. I don't know exactly how that happened. And punish the water. Ask your historians if that happened, because it's a fantastic story. But it seems odd to us. We don't grant agency to inanimate things. And even certain animate things, we don't say that they are free. Dogs will pee on the carpet, but we don't say, you're punished. No iPad for 3 weeks. We say, don't do that. We put the dog's nose right in it. Or whatever, I don't know how you're supposed to do that. But we certainly don't say a couple of hours later, hey, remember when you peed in the carpet, dog? Now you're getting punished for it. The dog's like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm a dog. I don't remember anything that just happened 10 minutes ago. And also, how am I talking? That's how that would go. So, the question that we're asking now is, even if, as conscious beings that we are, in fact, that raises the question, if consciousness is needed for free will, then you have to ask, well, when did we get this consciousness? I'm going to ask you a loaded question here. How many of you chose to be conceived? Yes, you did?
No, I mean,
Oh.
I have a question. So, hypothetically, there are millions of sperms, and in a way, our sperm chose to be the first one.
It did? In a way, that's interesting. In a way, it chose
The
to.
last one is like one of the
Yeah, fight. Yeah, I used to, I don't know where I got this shirt, but I had a shirt and had a bunch of depictions of sperm on it, and then there was one at the top, all beat up and bruised, and it said, the strong survive. And so there's a sense in which, yeah, there's intentionality. Kind of like Family Guy with Stewie. You have the opening credits of the first Family Guy where Stewie's in a little plane or whatever. You know what I'm talking about, Family Guy?
Yeah.
Stewie's an infant, but in this case he's a sperm, which is confusing. That implies identity starts, and you are a sperm, not the connection of the two. So technologically that's probably flawed. Not the point here. But it may be the case that... Actually, let me back up. Where are we going with that? With this question of...
It's just you ask whether we chose to be conceived, and I mean, ourselves chose to be conceived.
And what does that mean? Do we mean that metaphorically?
Are we selves or selves we? Or
Oh. Ah. We are comprised of cells, that's true.
Yeah, but like for example, our sperm, we started from somewhere, right?
We did. And,
Us.
and therefore, that's an interesting question. Since we start from these parts, and we presume as a whole we're free, it follows that the parts that make us up must be free too. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but since that part didn't have consciousness, doesn't mean that it's us. Or what is us? Or what is me? Or what is
Oh
you?
boy, yeah. See how the identity question ties in. I worry that there's a fallacy of division there. The fallacy of division says that what is true of the whole is true of the parts that make up the whole. So if we presuppose that the whole, myself, at the macro level, is free, then we must say, following that reasoning, that all my parts are also free, right? My hand is free. Why? Because it's part of a whole of me that is free. But that would be weird to speak of a hand independently being free. But there are movies about that, by the way. The arm gets cut off, it still attacks people. Go ahead.
So then if our part chose to be conceived, doesn't that mean our whole chose to be conceived?
And that's the fallacy of composition. Unless we say more about it, it's not necessarily a fallacy, right? So you're saying, since it's true that, and we'll see a version of this with indeterminism, as it's called later on. There's an argument from indeterminism that says we're free because the parts that make us up are random, and therefore there's room for freedom. But let's imagine the parts that make us up chose to be born, therefore we chose to be born. You'd have to, the burden now pushes it back. In what sense are you using chose and choose and free? Is it truly the metaphysical sort that matters, that the cells are free? We have to say a lot more to justify that claim. But if you could justify that claim, then the next hurdle would be, why does it follow that the parts that are free make the whole free? How does that fallacy work? The bridge over Loma Alta is comprised of subatomic particles that are invisible to the naked eye. Therefore, the bridge that is composed of those parts is also invisible to the naked eye. That doesn't follow because of the fallacy of composition. Your hand is...
Yeah, no, because I was trying to say, like, people don't come from sperm, they come from the two coming together.
That's why Stewie's,
Yeah.
the Family Guy is a bit
because
misleading.
That episode, I know what you're talking about because it's supposed to be like a dogfight of two planes of who gets out first. Is it like Stewie's enemy or is it Stewie?
Okay, I misconstrued that. I thought it was implying that this is how Stewie came to be.
No,
He would-
that is how it is because
Oh.
like Stewie won the dogfight of fighting the other like person in the other sperm.
I got you, yeah.
But it's just completely it just doesn't.
Yeah, it's
all the biological.
granted, I don't know that we want to go to Family Guy for our biology, but we can go there for other things. It's a fantastic show. So, here's the question that's asked by Baron de Holbach. He doesn't talk about conception, he talks about being born. And he says, the very first page of the reading, no one chose to be born. That's a fundamental, trivially true claim, it seems, but it has huge implications. No one chose to be born. There's something that the philosopher Thomas Nagel refers to as moral luck. What's an example of moral luck? Being born to the mother family that you were born to. Being born in the time period that you were born. Being born where you were born. That's an instance of moral luck. You had no role in choosing. Your genetics, you didn't choose. Your chemistry, you didn't choose. Your accent, you didn't choose. At least not initially. You get that from your mom. It's the first voice you hear in the womb. No one chose to be born. Fine, I wasn't free to be born. But I was free after... Here, where do you put it? When's your first free choice? Go ahead.
It wasn't on that, sorry.
Oh.
Wait, so like if you like had a kid and then you only talked like in an Australian accent, they would have an Australian accent?
Put another shrimp on the Barbie, yeah. Yeah? What? Yeah, I wasn't born in Australia. Was that Austrian? I combined Austrian with Australian, yeah. Yes, I mean, if I had the time and I was cruel enough, I could have tested that on my son. So he goes up and, so you're from England, your son? Nope, just testing things. Turns out it works. I can make him have any accent I want him to have. Yeah, that's the answer to that. And that makes parenting horrible because you realize how much responsibility you have. They remember things. He repeats things, and they don't forget things. And I can sense his frustration with when he's on his iPad. Where's he getting that frustration? It's not natural. First of all, iPads with children aren't natural. It's a bad idea, but whatever. I'm a shitty parent. I don't care. Let's move on. But his reactions now, I'm noticing. That's how I behave too. He's getting that from me. So there's something to be said for mimicry, and he's not necessarily consciously doing it, which relates to this question of freedom as well, right? Infants, within day-old infants, can mimic their mother's expressions. How are they doing that? They don't even know they have faces, and yet they can mimic exactly the smile or sticking their tongue out of the mother. So it's not clear that they're freely doing this. And this has ethical implications too. We tend to do this even in normal cases. So I used to wait tables for many years, and I had a habit of repeating what the customers asked for, just so they knew that I knew what they wanted, right? This is a common practice for waiters and waitresses. And so one day I'm going around the table and saying, what can I get you? The person would say, I'll have a gin and tonic. So I wrote that down, gin and tonic, repeated it. I'll also have that, I'll have a gin and tonic too, gin and tonic. The next person said, can I get a gin and soda? I said, okay, gin and soda. And I wrote that down. And then just went to the next person really quickly. But of course, I just mimicked that person. And it wasn't conscious, right? And I caught it, and I just quickly went on. And I don't know that the other person did. But that happens immediately, and oftentimes without our awareness. I only just caught it. There's another case, a friend of ours, who did this, but to an extreme, and was unaware of it, of taking on the accent. And this is what you act in ways that people around you act. So you stick with a group of people, you're going to tend to act similarly. That's not surprising. This kind of mimicry happens, because that's one way of learning, by the way, through mimicry. So anyway, this friend who had a Chinese restaurant, guess where this is going, the waitress comes over, a heavy accent, asks what we want, he answers, mimicking her accent perfectly, and not even aware that he's doing it. And he looked like such a dick. What are you doing? Stop that. He was unaware that he was mimicking that accent. In most cases, that is actually kind of a sign of empathy, that you're connecting with that person. But in this case, there's a fine line between mockery and a kind of empathetic connection. The point being here is that it seems unconscious. And therefore, we don't put as much responsibility on my friend in that case, and on me in that case with repeating what that person said. Because a lot of this has to do with conditioning, which it struck me. I have something to show you if I can find it. I think it's available. You all know about let's see, The Office. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so you're already familiar with this. Okay, let's watch and then we'll explain. This is Dwight Schrute, one of the best names in all television.
Oh, damn, wasn't that file? I have to reboot again. Hey Dwight, do you want an Altoid? What do you think? In school, we learned about this scientist who trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell by feeding them whenever a bell rang. So for the past couple weeks, I've been conducting a similar experiment. What? One Altoid? Okay. Altoid? Sure. Bench pipe? Big bird? Yes. What are you doing? What? I don't know. My mouth tastes so bad all of a sudden.
Some good sound effects. So now this is not how conditioning works. Just 3 times and then boom, you're conditioned without your control. It takes time. And this is a show, of course. This is caricaturing it. However, if you take a class in psychology about conditioning, operant or classical conditioning, you'll learn about situations like this that happen all the time. And in fact, there's a story about B.F. Skinner, I believe it was, or one of his graduate students, who was giving a class on, the whole class was about conditioning. And this professor had the habit of walking back and forth on the front of the class as he lectured, from one side of the room all the way to the other. I mean, and he would go all the way. So he'd go all the way over here, he's just discussing. And Scantron sheets, if anyone wants those. Wouldn't it be strange, though, if he taught from just, like if I taught from right here, just taught to one person, the whole class? That would be awkward. What they wanted to do, the class, who was learning about conditioning, was to see if they can condition their professor, who was teaching them about conditioning, to teach from one place in the room, to get him to stop walking back and forth. And they did it without his conscious awareness. How do you think they might have done that? Yeah.
They only responded when you were on one side of it.
That's right. Or that would be positive reinforcement. So when he's over there, that's the hot spot. Let's get him to teach here. How do we do that? Well, when he's there, then we all pay attention, right? And it's not consciously registering necessarily, but these cues, these subtle cues are you're writing notes, looking up, smiling, nodding in agreement, still, again, taking notes. Teachers always love to see, and not yawning. And then when he leaves that spot, people put their heads down, subtly. It's not like they make a sound, ah! And then it's, I don't like that sound, he goes back. It's subtle. Although that would be a funny way of doing it, because that's how Pavlov worked with the sound and the dog. By the end of the semester, again, this takes a long time, the positive reinforcement was continued, and he finally just stayed in one spot. And some of the students asked him, what are you doing in the corner of the room? And they laughed, and he got so angry because he was conditioned. He was, even somebody who was an expert and teaching about conditioning was controlled. Against his will, we would say, right? Have you ever been conditioned? It's a loaded question. Have you ever bought something based on subliminal messages?
Yes.
How do you know? Have you ever caught yourself buying something and then asking yourself, why am I buying this? And then you remember, oh yeah, because that damn commercial jingle, whatever it is, because they're all terrible, but it's going through your head. That earworm, as it's called. You can't get it out of your head. And you're realizing, oh my gosh, I'm buying this product only because that commercial was so effective. It got into my head. Whatever it might be. Have you experienced that? And even if you haven't experienced it consciously, do you think you're immune to commercials? Do people who make commercials, a better question, do people who make commercials think you're immune to commercials? They do not. They spend billions of dollars, that industry, in marketing ideas to you in ways that gets at you subtly, not explicitly. Rarely do commercials have straightforward arguments. Buy our product because here are the reasons. Here's the justification in the form of a syllogism. Nobody does that, although they should. If I'm going to sell my product and it's better than others, here are my arguments. That doesn't happen. People don't care for arguments as much as other kinds of persuasion, unfortunately. So, in that case, it seems that there's a significant amount of conditioning. And if this is true with cases like the professor, could it be true with cases like children who start the conditioning, let's say, as late as the third trimester, where they're taking on the accent of their mother, where they're hearing their mother's voice and it's affecting the brain activity. Then they're born. And they're conditioned by their mother and father and siblings and friends and television and iPad and basic society. If it's not the case that I'm free to choose to be born, as Baron de Holbach, I think, rightly says, am I free on the first day? Or am I being conditioned? Do you see what I'm saying? At what point can I say, aha! Oh! That's Schadenfreude right there, you guys laughing at me. Remember Schadenfreude? Laughing at my suffering? Hope you feel bad about that. You don't. So, what was I saying?
Free on first day.
Yeah, so it's not the first day. I'm a day-old infant. I don't think a day-old infant is free. How about the second day? How about the third day? On it goes. What day? What minute do you say, not free, now it's free? It becomes you. now you are free. Do you see the problem? This raises the question that the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer raises with this fantastic quotation, which makes sense when you first read it, and then you read it again and it doesn't. And then if you read it a couple more times, it makes sense again with a great deal of depth to it. You can do what you want, but you can't want what you want. So what does that mean? And related to our discussion here about moral luck, about not choosing to be born, about where your first moral free choice would be. Yeah.
You have the free choice to do things, but your desires are imposed by other outside of your consensus.
Right. So where do desires come from? If they're not mine, and I'm not responsible for them, and my actions come from my desires, it seems we have a problem, right? Go ahead. Yes. Where do my desires come from? We get them from parents. Maybe it's the case that we can say, no, these desires are authentically mine. Well, how are they yours? Did you choose them? What's your favorite color?
Blue.
Why?
I don't know.
Good enough. That's all you got to give. What else can you say? Can you give an argument? Can you give a reason? Do you want to like blue?
I think my mind wants to like blue.
Your mind wants to.
My eyes,
Does it want to like it, or does it just like it?
it just likes it.
Does it want to want it? Because you're wearing blue right now, coincidentally. Or not coincidentally, actually. Go ahead.
But like, your favorite color is kind of dependent on like not everyone else, unless you're mimicking other people. But it's like it's because it's aesthetically pleasing.
And why is it aesthetically pleasing? What's your favorite color?
And then the other part is just that like I pretty much don't agree with any of my friends or family on like any subjects. But I have
On purpose?
No idea.
Or
No,
did you
no,
just disagree with them?
Like just my mind is telling me I disagree with them, but I have no idea then where those things came from.
Oh, okay. Does that make it free or less free? That you have no idea where they came from? Well, that's why, if I'm choosing, because if you had said, I know why I'm disagreeing with them, and it's coming from me, that's clearer an instance of freedom. Whereas if I say, I have no idea where it's coming from, that may be an instance of indeterminism, which is in the text, which is not the same thing as freedom.
Ping in your brain, you know, like if
A
you
what?
see a really pretty color, there's just a little ping in your brain like, that
Right.
feels good.
Exactly. That doesn't sound like freedom. That doesn't sound like I'm choosing it. So I asked my son, Milo, what's your favorite color? He said, blue. And I said, why? He said, just is. He just kind of yelled at me. And I said, whoa, okay. And then he eventually said, well, because I like blue things. And I said, Milo, that's circular. And then we got into a discussion of, what circular reasoning is, very briefly. But notice, maybe there's ways out of this circle, and maybe it's not a vicious circle. Maybe we can say, I like blue, and here are the reasons why. But can you do so in a way that shows you're wanting to want it? Or do you just find yourself wanting it? And think of all the desires you have, whether it's your favorite color or your favorite spouse. That's a weird way of putting it. Do you choose to be attracted to something or someone? Go on.
Well, then couldn't you argue that you have no free will because the chemical reactions in your brain tell you release dopamine when you see that color?
That's right. That would be the ping that you talked about. It's immediate. It's a chemical. It's aesthetically pleasing. What does aesthetically pleasing mean? On one reductive interpretation, one that Baron de Holbach might argue for, and he wouldn't talk of it in terms of neurons, because that was not yet understood. But it's your brain. It's your biology that drives your desires. He'll call them passions, and that's important. When you see the word passion in de Holbach, think in terms of emotions, and think of it in terms of desires. And passions literally has the sense of passive. It's happening to you, right? And emotions, really hard to control. That's why I always hated when people would say, hey, Chris, turn that frown upside down. I said, what? What does that mean? Just stop being angry. Oh, I thought, I didn't know it was that easy. Okay. And just stop being angry. Why does it work that way? That's why there's a whole pharmaceutical industry that can sell you drugs, because they believe, maybe they're wrong, but they believe that you don't have control by yourself over your own emotions. Go ahead.
What about instances it's like where it's almost like a form of conditioning, like for example, I used to smell corned beef and cabbage at my very Irish grandparents' house, and all of it's Irish American. And now I like that smell. But that's just because I'm associated with my grandparents. Is that a form of conditioning, or is that more like a free will thing? Like I remember my grandparents, love my grandparents.
Well, memories.
Therefore, that's desirable. Like
Tough. That's tough because memories typically happen. I smell a skunk and it takes me back to Pennsylvania, Reading, Pennsylvania, when I first smelled skunks. Perhaps I don't have control over that immediate connection. But memory's confusing. That may make things more complex because memory is not simply a matter of replaying what happened. We'll talk about this with identity, questions of identity. Memory has a lot to do with reconstructing what happened. I see the past through all sorts of things that have happened up to this point. And sometimes I omit things. Am I willfully omitting those things? Am I responsible for omitting those things? That's, I think, a bit much for us to get into now. So I'll say I don't know with respect to memory, whether or not that plays a role with freedom. Let me just cash out this argument here. If it's true that everything you do is ultimately a result of what you like or desire, and it's true that you don't have control over what you like or desire, it follows that what you do, bless you, is not done freely, right? Maybe you disagree, though, with premise one. Or maybe you disagree with the notion that my actions are, in fact, not caused by desires, but something else. But if you do that, take that route, you would have to explain how that something else allows for freedom in the relevant sense. Now, this isn't just an esoteric metaphysical question that only philosophers care about and has no real-world implications. You can see some real-world implications of these discussions, right? Such as what? Oh, maybe they're not.
Sleepwalking people.
Sleepwalking people,
If
yes.
they committed a crime, and determining whether they're guilty or not,
Right.
or responsible.
But wouldn't that apply to all people? So there was a case years ago where this guy had a bomb strapped around his neck, and he was told, "Go rob that bank, or we'll blow your head off." He knew robbing the bank was wrong, but you can understand that he wasn't free, such that if he had survived, which he didn't, if he had survived that, I suspect he wouldn't have been punished because he was forced to do it. He lacked freedom. And so we might say that we might look at other court cases. Are there situations in which the individuals aren't sufficiently free to have done what they did?
Could you say he was forced by the guy to do it or forced by his instinct to survive?
Ooh, that's what Baron de Holbach would say. In either case, it limits freedom. De Holbach is going to say, the desire to live is not one that you choose, it's just one you have, and it will drive you to drink water. Even if that water is poisoned. If that water is poisoned and you know it, you're choosing not to drink it isn't showing free will. It's showing you that you know it'll kill you, and that desire not to die, which is not your chosen desire, is already predetermined. You had a question too, I think.
Oh, I was thinking if you're talking about that case where I think that guy was actually involved, but the other partner tricked him into believing that the device actually wasn't working, but in turn it
That's
did, and
complex.
he was shocked when the thing went off.
I don't know that part of it.
There's a video of it.
Yeah.
Of it happening if you're talking about
Yeah, I did that.
I was
Yeah.
just thinking about it, sorry.
Yeah, that's more complex than I thought it was. That makes it more difficult. How guilty is he?
What he was doing, but
Yeah.
he was tricked into it, so like.
There's still a sense in which we would say this guy's not 100% culpable, which brings up some questions. I've already talked. Well, we already talked about. Let me just reference this real quick, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So, are we metaphysically free? Do we choose who we're attracted to? Right? That's a social question that was relevant. It's not as relevant today as it was just maybe 5-6 years ago, where an argument was common that it is immoral to be homosexual because you're presumed a choice there, that one chooses their sexual. We call it sexual preference, as if you're preferring it in the sense that you choose it. But Schopenhauer's quotation seems to imply, well, no, you don't choose those things. How many of us wake up in the morning and say to ourselves, I want to be attracted to the opposite sex, or to the same sex, or to that person? Or do you instead find that, I'm just attracted to that person, or to these people, and so on? it seems that that kind of thing happens to us passively. And where control is not obvious. Are our choices conscious in all cases? And if not, we already addressed some of the problems with that. Is consciousness necessary for freedom? If so, then a lot of the things that we do are at least muddy. The waters are a bit muddy. It's not obvious. And notice this has implications. We'll get to the philosophy of religion later on, but there are some interesting implications here. Because if I'm not 100% totally free, then you can imagine some problems invoking heaven and hell. Do you see what I mean? To give you an overview, to jump to the bottom here, if I'm not a libertarian who believes that I'm fully free, I'm a fully free agent, then I ought to be concerned that there is a heaven or a hell. By the way, on page 80 of Rauhat, you have a more detailed overview of the different theories. Page 80, with the smallest print possible, where you have the different approaches. Determinism, indeterminism, compatibilism, and libertarianism. There's a lot involved in this. We're only going to be covering these. In fact, it may be even easier for you to just refer to determinism as such. Not William James, psychologist, added the term hard and soft to distinguish the different positions. As a hard determinist, there's no room for freedom. As a soft determinist, the laws of physics, cause and effect, those are determined, but there's room for freedom. Soft in that sense. It may be easier just to speak of determinism and compatibilism. A compatibilist is someone who says, yeah, the laws of physics hold. Yeah, the causal principle, which I'll describe in a moment, holds. Yes, every effect has a cause. We have a determined universe, fine. But that fact is compatible with the fact of human free will. How that's cashed out, we'll see different versions of it. Traditional compatibilism and deep self-compatibilism. We'll see W.T. Stace, the reading for next class, is a traditional compatibilist. And we'll describe the difference between those two. And finally, where I was at a moment ago, if I'm going to believe in a heaven or hell, if there's determinism, then it makes very little sense. Right? My actions are determined. Well, then why would I be punished for eternity for doing wrong? I better be 100% responsible for my actions if I'm going to suffer eternal hell for them. Because if there's any moral luck involved, then full culpability, full guilt seems unjustified. But notice, that's a potential problem. Hell is a long time. Eternity is a long time, rather, and hell is pretty awful. Heaven is supposed to be great, but if I don't 100% deserve everything and am responsible for everything I've done, then it doesn't seem just, so to speak. So, to jump a little bit ahead, libertarianism seems to make sense if heaven and hell are presumed to be the case. But if we lack a libertarian sort of free will, which is an extreme version of complete responsibility, which is a good thing in the United States. We kind of have this notion of individual responsibility. If you've made it in the United States where everything's free and equal and opportunities are there, that means you deserve it. And if you haven't made it, well, you deserve that too. You just haven't worked hard enough. Which has its positives and its negatives, as you can probably already imagine. So that's the overview of the kind of approaches. And next class we're going to get at responses to determinism. So let me say a few more things about determinism before we take a break here. Let me distinguish it between this kind of determinism and what we were speaking of a moment ago. Actually, before I do that, what were we talking about? I said I was going to get right back to you. Oh, right.
You're saying you had no.
Oh, that connects there. It's complex. It's not so clear-cut anymore. I thought he was completely innocent in that he was corralled in and forced to do something. Like in the movie Seven, that guy was forced to do a horrible crime because he was forced to do it at gunpoint. Now, I guess we might say, well, he had a choice. He could have chosen to take a bullet instead of kill that other person. Remember the movie Seven? Nobody's seen Seven?
I have.
Really? It's like a classic.
I was actually thinking of that when you brought up the
Yeah.
example of the guy with the bomb around.
Yeah,
his neck.
that's. I mean, we don't need to describe the scene.
Yeah.
It's gruesome. But the point is that in that case, the person was. We wouldn't punish them, right? We get them mental help because of what they had to go through. But if I'm a libertarian, I might say, well, no, he still had the choice. He was told to kill this person or he would die. I guess he could have said, all right, I'll die. But he didn't. I don't know what I would do in that situation. I don't know if you know what you would do. That makes it very complex. And the case that you discussed about the bomb in the neck, knowing these other factors makes it that even more complex. Is this person guilty completely or innocent completely? Neither, it seems. And so heaven and hell are very complex now, because is anyone 100% guilty or 100% innocent? Something to think about. Now, to contrast the kind of determinism that Baron de Holbach is invoking, which we would call physical or causal determinism, this is called fatalism. I don't know why I have that. My karma ran over your dogma. Why is that even there? Okay, so think of karma in the sense that it's fated to happen. You do good, you'll get good later. You do bad, you'll get bad later. Eventually, no matter what you do, that's going to come. Well, that doesn't follow. I don't know why that's there now. That doesn't actually fit logically. Karma implies gaining something because of what you did. It's dependent upon what you did. Fatalism means something's going to happen to you no matter what you do. I think I just throw that up there because it's a joke and tangentially related to what we're talking about. The story of Oedipus would be an example of fatalism. It's a kind of determinism, but again, not the kind that we're talking about. Do you know what happened to Oedipus?
Was he tricked into fornicating with his mother?
He wasn't tricked into fornicating with his mother. He did it himself, not knowing. It wasn't a trick necessarily. He was fated to sleep with his mother and kill his father. And his parents learned of this oracle, this fate. And in order to avoid it, they had their son killed. He's called Oedipus because his feet were swollen, the root, swollen foot, because his parents bound him up to be exposed to the elements. But they couldn't do it themselves because they had pity on him or whatever. So they gave him to somebody else to kill. Kind of like all the James Bond movies where James Bond's caught, but then the evil guy says, all right, you guys go kill him. And then James Bond gets away. So that's what happened. This guy, the farmer or rancher, whatever, has pity on the child. Instead of killing him, sends it to another village, thinking that would be enough. The king and queen of the other village, other city, raise Oedipus as their own child, but they don't tell him that he's not their child. He learns of his oracle that he's going to kill his father, sleep with his mother. He doesn't want to do that, so he flees, and he leaves. I think it's Corinth or whatever, and he happens upon somebody on the path that's blocking his way. He gets angry, some road rage, I guess. The guy's in a pickup, and he kills the guy and a couple of other people. And one of the people he kills, of course, happens to be his father. He didn't know that. He was fated to kill his father. No matter what he did, even as he's leaving to get away from his presumed father, he ends up killing his father. He happens on to follow to, I think, Thebes or wherever it was. Maybe I got the cities backwards. There's the Sphinx who's destroying the city. And he answers the riddle of the Sphinx, thereby saving the city. The answer is man. Read the story if you want to get the riddle itself. And as a reward for saving the city, guess what he gets to do? Marry the Queen Jocasta, and he consummates the marriage. And what happens? He then learns, that's my mom, and that was my dad. And he ends by gouging his eyes out. The end. As Woody... You should read the whole story. I'm skipping a lot, but that's, Woody Allen in his movie Crimes and Misdemeanors has one of his characters say, that's the structure of comedy, which is surprising. But that, like all of the, what are those movies where you know you're going to die and you're told this is how you're going to die, nothing you can do to stop it? Final Destination. That's fatalism. Yeah. Well, the Final Destination 7, that's not bad. You don't even need to watch the first 6 to get what's happening.
Sure.
That is a different kind of determinism. If I take a pan of water, and it's at sea level, and I raise it to a certain temperature, then it will boil. That, based upon the causal chain leading up to it and the laws of physics, is the kind of determinism that Baron de Holbach and most determinists, such that they are today, accept. Fatalism says that water is going to boil no matter what the hell you do. No, not what's going on here. So determinism of the sort that we're interested in now talks about and relies upon this causal principle. Rauhat will talk about the causal principle, but he'll also reference something else called the principle of sufficient reason, which I'll explain in a moment. Very similar to this, but I think we ought to make a distinction. Our science is dependent upon this. Cause and effect relations, being able to make accurate predictions, determine what disease is caused by what cause, for instance, brought about by what bacteria, what have you. Last year there was an eclipse, do you remember? Astronomers here on campus were able to tell us, down to the minute, when the best time to view the eclipse would be. How could they do that? Because of the basic causal principle. Because of the capacity to make predictions based upon an understanding of the laws of physics and an understanding of the causal chain. The chain of cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect, leading up to the present moment. The future is determined. It's simply our ignorance. This goes to your claim earlier about illusion. Free will is merely an illusion brought on by our ignorance. De Holbach might say something similar to this. What is the ignorance about? Ignorance about causes. We simply don't know all the causal factors leading into the actions that we take. And because of that gap in knowledge, we fill it in with the illusion that we're choosing. But if we knew all the facts, if we knew all the physical facts leading up to the moment where we are now, we could chart with 100% certainty the next move each of us is going to make. In fact, this is borrowing from around the time of Baron de Holbach, something called Laplace's demon, which is a thought experiment in which we can imagine a demon who has all of the knowledge of the physical facts in the universe, down to the atom. And if you knew all about that, if you had all the relevant facts, you would be able to predict with certainty what's going to happen next. In the thought experiment, that makes sense. If I've got in a laboratory experiment, I've got a billiard ball table, and I know everything there is to know about the billiard ball table. I know the amount of friction. I know the slope. I know the weight of the billiard balls. I know the force that's going to be applied. If I knew all of the relevant physical facts, I could determine ahead of time where all the balls are going to end up. That's not hard to imagine. The world outside of that is simply a more complex situation that is the same kind of thing as the billiard ball table. Human beings are just way more complex and therefore harder to understand the causal relations. We don't have enough information. But if we did, with this evil demon or this demon who knows all the physical facts, we could predict everyone's behavior, everyone's decisions before it happens. Because it's all, and this here's where de Holbach comes in with this, he's a materialist, it's all purely physical, which is important. And if we could determine with 100% certainty, that means the future is set based upon the causal history. And there's no room for freedom. Now that's a difficult conclusion to derive from all of this. It's hard, that's why William James referred to it as hard determinism. Hard in the sense that there's no break from it, but also hard to accept. Because if it's true, then we ought to rethink our prison system, for one thing. But let's quickly look before we leave. We have 5 more minutes here. Page 84 of Rauhat. I want to make, you'll see the argument there. There's a version of the free will argument, the argument for determinism on page 84. It's a decent representation of it. It's basically Baron de Holbach's argument, but with contemporary language. All events have causes. All our actions are events. All caused events are determined by the past, and on it goes. I'm not going to read through that whole thing right now. But it's based upon this notion that just seems obvious to us. It has to be true, or else our sciences don't work. We need some explanation for how our sciences work, and it seems that this causal principle is necessary. If it's necessary, what room is there for freedom? And notice what he says above that argument on 84. If you don't have your Rauhut text, shame on you, first of all. Second of all, just make note of it in your notes where I'm talking about. At the top of that argument, right before that paragraph, he says, we might not know exactly why an airplane has crashed, but we do seem to know that something must have caused the crash. We don't say the airplane crashed, but there was no cause of it. That would be ridiculous, because every effect has a cause. The basic principle at work here is the principle of sufficient reason. Notice the word reason, which claims that anything that happens does so for a definite reason. We seem to follow this principle in all aspects of life. And in fact, I suspect that you've said it before yourself. Haven't you used that phrase? Everything happens for a reason. And once you've said that, doesn't that imply that there's room for freedom? Because reasons sound like, here are explanations. But causes don't necessarily have to imply that. And let me put it another way. Is there a difference between a reason and a cause? I'll put it this way, it's even further. Here's a marker. It gets dropped. Why did the marker fall? There are two explanations you can give.
Not for your thing, but what I thought was like a driver, like the car caused the accident, but the reason was the person.
Oh, good. So let's use that example. I'm driving along and I see my enemy. I hate that guy. I'm going to get him. And I run him over. Kill him. What caused the death? Well, the coroner can say, well, it was a blunt force trauma based upon this guy's Porsche, because I drive a Porsche, smashing into the guy. It's actually a bicycle, but whatever. And that's what caused the death. But notice that's not the full explanation. Okay, the car caused the death. Fine. But what was the reason? You wouldn't say, well, the reason the car killed him. That's weird. You'd say the reason I intentionally drove the car into that person was this or that. Do you see the difference? I dropped the marker. I can give you a purely causal explanation. Laws of physics say all objects fall at 9.8 meters per second squared. When I release, you can get really, really detailed. Here are the causal factors of how the fingers opened up and that let the marker fall and so on. But in no case do I have why I chose to allow the marker to fall, and that's different than purely causal explanation, which Rauhut doesn't seem to distinguish, which probably should be distinguished. The reason the marker fell was for me because I intended, I desired, I chose to show you the difference, to demonstrate the difference between reasons and causes. Do you think, here's what I'll leave you with today, and I know you've said it, some of you have said it, maybe today, you've said the phrase, everything happens for a reason. I want you to think about that. Are there exceptions to that claim? Are there things that happen that may be caused, but happen for no reason at all? And that will get us back into where we are for next time. Keep up with the readings, anticipate a quiz. As always, those who are taking the test now, please turn those in. Oh, I guess you can go. You're free to go, everyone. Huh?
Did you take roll?
Yes, let me make you know.
Yeah.
All right, Professor.
Have a good one.
Yeah, have a nice weekend.
What was your last name?